Good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to those of you who have joined us for the fourth instalment of the GATCO-BALPA Symposium, where we will be joined by the CAA's Innovation Hub team, David Tate, Angela Lynch, and Alex Georgiades. Just a bit about these guys. David is a qualified solicitor with a background in international and governmental organisations, having worked for the Commonwealth Secretariat, an international corporation for assigned names and numbers on issues of policy and regulation in emerging technologies. Alex is the Innovation Services Principal of the Innovation Hub. He was responsible for leading the innovation programs on autonomous systems and artificial intelligence and detect and avoid systems for UAS operations. He is also collaborating with innovators through the Innovations Hub's sandbox to safely trial novel technologies aiming at modernising the aviation and aerospace industries. Alex has previously worked as a researcher in simulation projects for Airbus and as a postdoctoral researcher in aerial robotics. He obtained his PhD in aerospace systems engineering and optimization from the Cranford University. And lastly, Angela has a background in policy and international engagement, having worked for the City of London Corporation prior to joining the CAA in 2016. She served as the CAA Board Secretariat before joining the innovation team. Her current role includes a focus on UAM and supporting related innovation work on developing future regulatory approaches. The Innovation Hub have come to talk about their mission: create an environment where innovation in aviation can flourish. This team have been doing some important work in the field of UTM and how future air mobility and beyond visual line of sight operations will safely fit into that landscape. Additionally, this team have been focusing on its understanding of artificial intelligence, specifically within highly automated systems. These areas are very much of interest for echoes and pilots alike. We hope you all find the presentation interesting. We encourage you to ask questions, which we will collect and ask on your behalf at the end of the session. Please post these in the chat function on your screen, and I will ask your questions to the team on your behalf at the end. We will try and cover as many questions as we can, but we're limited to an hour and a half, I'm afraid. Just a bit of housekeeping. Could I ask you all to turn your cameras off, apart from the presenters and myself, and mute your microphones, which will help this event run smoothly. Additionally, you can put your WebEx to speaker view, which will allow the presenter and the slides to become maximised on your screen. The session is also being recorded for future distribution. I'm now going to hand over to David to start the presentation. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Zoe, and good morning, everyone. We'll do some introductions in a moment, but I'm David Tate, and I'm the Head of Innovation at the Civil Aviation Authority. First of all, thank you very much to BALPA and to GATCO for hosting us today. Pilots and air traffic controllers are obviously a key communities within the aviation ecosystem, and it's a real pleasure for us to have the opportunity to speak to you. Perhaps too often we don't get the chance to come out and speak to you directly, and so it's really welcome from our perspective to the chance to share a bit of an overview of our work and hopefully to answer some questions you might have for us, and hopefully they won't be too tough. So the proposed outline that we've got today is to give you an overview of the CAA and the Innovation Hub, where we fit into the broader CAA. I know you'll be very familiar with the role of the regulator but we have a somewhat unique position within it. We're then going to take a deep dive into 4 particular topics: UAS traffic management, autonomous and highly automated systems, BVLOS drone operations, and future mobility. We've picked these because we think they'll be of particular interest to your communities. And rather than have you listen to me monologue for an hour and a half, I've brought some colleagues with me who I'll introduce you to in a moment, and they're going to be taking us through some of these particular topics. So, as we said, I'm David Tate, I'm the Head of Innovation. I've been in post for 18 months now, and prior to that, I was involved in the setting up of the Innovation Hub, and I'll take you through that journey in a moment. With me, to our colleague Alex Georgiades, who is our Innovation Services Principal, and he's going to be particularly talking about the autonomous and highly automated systems and BVLOS drone operations. And then also with us is Angela Lynch, who's a regulatory innovation specialist, and Angela is going to be speaking to us about future mobility and the work that she's been leading in that part of our team. So you may or may not have heard of the CAA's Innovation Hub. We were established around about 2 years ago. The mission that we've been given by the CAA board is to create an environment where innovation can flourish in line with our principles. Those principles are safety, consumer protection, and security. The genesis of the hub being established really came from the very top of the CAA business, from our board, and their recognition that there were certain key trends in technological development, in new technologies and business models coming into the aviation ecosystem from other industries and sectors, the shortening of R&D timelines, as well as certain key trends in technology, so improved battery efficiency, the miniaturization of electric motors, and the increasing interest in hydrogen as a potential alternative to traditional hydrocarbon-based propulsion. All of these things coming at a time when we alongside digital connectivity and digital technologies, and really it was a bit of a perfect storm of innovation and new technology and new business models, and people coming to the CAA and saying, we want to do things differently, we want to deploy new ideas in the field faster than ever before, and the regulator having a very clear mandate from government that while we had to maintain the very high standards of safety, security, and consumer protection that are the hallmark of the UK aviation and aerospace sectors, we had to ensure that we were not a barrier to innovation. That's very common, and that was a challenge that was given to other regulators across the economy, including other safety regulators, in relation to the that very much was a feature of the industrial strategy, which was published in May of 2018, and that gave the impetus and also importantly funding to the CAA to establish our team. Now, when we put the team together, we engaged a lot with the sector. We went out and spoke to existing primes, to communities who are involved in aviation, to new market entrants, and we tried to get as much feedback as possible, both about how the CAA was perceived in relation to innovation, but also in relation to the potential role that we could play in future. And that in particular helped us to design the services that we wanted to put in place. The feedback we got from the industry in particular was really interesting. We were told that the CAA had a very high reputational standing amongst its stakeholders, but at the same time, particularly new market entrants reported that we were viewed as being very much a club, and if you knew your way in to find the right person, then you would receive the very highest standard of service. While if you were new and didn't know where to go with an idea or a proposal, then it was much more challenging to find your route through to the appropriate regulatory team who would be able to help you, and that there also wasn't necessarily a seamless end-to-end journey for ideas from the very earliest levels of technological readiness all the way through to reaching the stage of deploying an idea into the market and making it available to consumers. So it was on that basis that we've designed really 5 capabilities which support our work, and I'm going to run through them very quickly before taking more of a deep dive into how they've been operating over the last year to 18 months. The first service we've put in place is a gateway. That is our open front end, a very strong web presence, and it's designed to make it easier for innovators in the aviation, aerospace and travel markets to get in touch with us. That involves having a single point of contact for all queries. You can access us by email at innovation@caa.co.uk with any query, and we will find the right home for it within our business. We have an online web form that allows people to engage with us and set up a more long-lasting, more detailed relationship. We publish a lot of clear, plain English guidance on specific innovation-focused topics. We've got an online web presence, a podcast presence that we've set up over the last year. And what's quite nice is that we were then followed in that by the FAA a few months later. And we've also been doing a lot of work in relation to outreach, working with new parts of the economy, particularly incubators, accelerators, and other growth platforms to engage with innovative companies, innovative startups and scale up much earlier in their journey. Alongside that, we've done something that's very common for lots of other regulators, and that's to establish a sandbox, the intention of which is to maximise the regulatory readiness of particularly novel ideas and technologies. We do that by exploring and testing concepts in a safe space, and I'll dive into what that means later on. The third capacity we've set up is the regulatory lab. That's our rapid prototyping capability for guidance, advice, new regulation. It's designed to anticipate and respond to the complex emerging aviation challenges that we're being asked to deal with, and to really give an insight into our thought leadership and the direction of travel that we see in relation to the future of regulation in the aviation, aerospace and travel sectors. Our fourth capability is horizon scanning. This is really the sort of core intelligence function that we've set up, which allows us to make sure that we're targeting the right trends and directing what are fairly scarce resources to the right place. And then finally, we've got a very strong business ops function that gives us the resilience to make sure the services are up and running at all times, and that we're able to meet the high levels of service that the sector quite rightly expects from us. So the Aviation Hub is nested in a really complex ecosystem, and has a lot of stakeholders, some of which you'll know very well, and others you may not have heard of before. So just to whiz you through that quickly and where we sit. The first thing is to say that we sit within the CAA Strategy and Policy Division. We are not a regulatory team. We are not like the Safety and Airspace Regulation Group. We will not issue or grant any regulatory approvals. That's not the nature of what we do. We're designed to help the whole of the CAA's business, and that's why we sit in the central strategy function. So we cover not just aviation or aerospace, but also travel and in future space. And our aim is to help the whole business have a better understanding of the more innovative parts of the economy and technologies that we're going to be dealing with in the future. And so that's why we sit there. Because we have that closer relationship to industry, it's not appropriate that we have a regulatory function. That has to be very carefully kept apart, and we have very strong governance controls. It's our number one risk. It's the thing we look to manage most carefully at all times, is to ensure that our regulatory independence is preserved and maintained. And we do that by making sure that we are very much a separate function from our regulatory colleagues. Those colleagues are in aviation security, in safety and airspace regulation, or in the competition and markets group. We work very closely with them. We share intelligence, we share ideas, we promote and explain new technologies and innovations, new business models to them. And we act as a translation function to industry, explaining how industry can better talk the language of regulators. I know very well that for air traffic controllers and for pilots, that is second nature, understanding and working within the regulatory framework. But for many of the entities that we're dealing with, this will be the first time that they've had to engage with those teams. And our job is to facilitate that engagement. We also work very closely with our international colleagues because we are very conscious that the UK is a high capacity jurisdiction. We're a high capacity regulator. We're often being asked to engage with many of the most complex technologies first, ahead of other jurisdictions, alongside our colleagues at EASA and at the FAA, and also in other jurisdictions like New Zealand or Singapore or Canada and Australia. We're often the very first jurisdictions that are being asked to look at these new technologies. And so a lot that we are learning very, very quickly, but we look to share that and increase the level of global knowledge transfer to other regulators, because we are very conscious that the CAA has a role as a leading regulator in a global network rather than operating in a silo. That's the opposite of what we're wanting to achieve. We then obviously have a very close relationship with government. We're often the first port of call for a government department, whether that's our immediate line department, DFT, or Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or Culture, Media and Sport, or the Home Office, in providing a view on new and emerging technologies and helping the government form a preliminary appraisal of those technologies. Sometimes that will be about, is that something the UK wants to invest in? Other times it will be about, is that something that the UK wants to have as a feature of our future aviation ecosystem? And so they'll turn to us for an initial view, and particularly our horizon scanning capability is proving increasingly important in helping to inform that decision making. Our role also is to provide advice to the variety of and facilitation to a variety of government programmes that are increasingly becoming important in terms of how the UK is positioning itself globally to respond to and support new technologies that are going to be coming into the aviation ecosystem over the next 2 to 10 years. With that in mind, we're very closely supporting the Future Flight Challenge. We work very closely with the Aerospace Technologies Institute, and we work very closely with other government initiatives such as the Jet Zero Council and the ATI's Fly Zero programme to make sure that the work is done up front to prepare the CAA to meet the demands of those UK strategic investments in certain technologies. So what we're trying to provide is a seamless interface. If the UK government has made a significant multi-million pound investment in a particular series of tests and trials of new technologies, then it's critical that the regulator is ready to respond to them and not be a blocker. That is not to say that we in any way fetter our discretion to say no things where it compromises our principles of safety, security, or consumer protection, but that the organisation is aware of what that pipeline of work is going to be, is ready, and has the capacities that are, and technical expertise that are necessary to respond to it. And that is a big challenge because there's so much technological development going on that it's often very difficult for organisations in the public sector to scale up their skills base quickly enough be able to respond to those technologies. And that's what our role is to be that frontline strategic response. And so we're playing that role both to our internal stakeholders, but also to government stakeholders as well. So that's where we fit in the landscape of the CAA and in government. So we've been up and running for, this slide says 1 year, but we've actually been up and running for 18 months, and in that time, this is just some highlights of how our functions have performed. In terms of the gateway, we've supported nearly 400 innovators with individual queries and questions, and that can be everything from, do I need a regulatory approval for a particular innovation, all the way through to just helping somebody have a conversation about a very early stage idea that they have. So quite a breadth of advice that we give out. We've produced 4 quarterly horizon scanning reports. Those are made available across government to help decision making. We've hosted 8 innovation clinics alongside partners. Now, one of the interesting features of that is that the last one that we did actually had to be done online. So we've tried to introduce resilience even in the time of COVID to make sure that we're able to meet the fact that the innovative end of the market is continuing to develop, even as while the core aviation market is facing a particularly challenging time. And we've produced a number of podcasts, and that's all part of us continuing to make clear what we see as the future direction of travel around technology in the sector. The sandbox that we're going to talk about in a lot of detail in a moment, we've had 10 participants so far. That's been grouped around 2 regulatory challenges, one on the issue of BV loss detect and avoid systems and the other on future air mobility. We received around more than 30 applications for the BV loss sandbox, which really went a long way to showing the significant levels of interest and the maturity of interest that there is in that those types of technologies, and we received significant support, significant interest in relation to our future mobility sandbox as well. In relation to our Reg Lab, we've established five key work streams on AI and automation, UTM, BV loss, future mobility, and the concept of a social license. And that's something we're particularly proud to have been involved in developing. It's really helped us focus and give some direction to industry about how to sustainably develop new technologies. It's not enough that we have the best technology, but it has to be technology that the public is able to understand and see the value of, and see how it can bring benefit to them. And that's really what we've tried to do with social licenses, hold up a mirror to good practice, not just in the aviation sector, but also in other parts of the economy, to show how new technologies can be sustainably added to our ecosystem. We've launched a call for insight around risk within future mobility. We've released 8 publications, and we're extremely involved in engaging with international partners, including ICAO, EASA, and a whole variety of other NAAs, and also regulators in the non-aviation sectors, because as I said earlier on, many of the new technologies that we're seeing coming through into aviation are not necessarily aviation specific when they start off, and therefore we have to be very much ahead of the curve in understanding how regulators in other sectors are trying to adapt to them. That's very important, a very important aspect of the work that we do in the Reg Lab too. So to dive into our sandbox, before we launched that, we wanted to take a very open approach, and we built a cohort of innovators who were focused on a number of very broad challenges, principally the ones that we're talking to you about today. So AI and highly autonomous systems, UAS, BVLOS operations, UTM, and future mobility. What drove that decision making was picking entities who we were already, the CAA at corporate level was already engaging with, where we felt that the maturity of those engagements and the nature of those engagements was starting to be one which was straying away from our core regulation activity and much more into advising on regulation and what the appropriate regulatory frameworks for the future were. So in relation to, so we picked those projects that we felt were sort of straining our existing regulatory model. In relation to NAT, that was the AMA Inter AI Assistant at Heathrow. In relation to Amazon, it was working on their looking at how we could better understand their proposals for drone deliveries. With Nesta, it was a public engagement program called the Flying High Challenge. With Altitude Angel, who are a UTM developer, it was looking at how their UTM platform could be used to support BVLOS drone operations. Volocopter, a German urban air mobility vehicle developer, and we were exploring what that technology could mean for the UK. And finally, NBEC is the National Beyond Visual Line of Sight Experimentation Centre, which is a joint venture between Cranfield University and a number of other significant players in the aerospace market, to establish a permanent UAS testing facility, which is located close to Cranfield Airport. We spent about a year working with those entities, and delivered some really significant results. We got some tremendous learning out of it. But what we quickly realised was that we weren't seeing enough progress in some of the cases, and that we needed a different approach which focused more closely on some of the, and I'm just checking I've not got the slide ahead. No, I don't. I haven't get this one in. Initially, we focused on this cohort of challenges, but we recognised quickly that we had to instead take a technological challenge-driven approach. And so instead of picking partners on the basis of their maturity, we developed an open challenge process which would allow innovators to come and compete to join our BVLOS sandbox. And Alex is going to talk about that in more detail when we get on to his slide. that was quite a pivot in our approach. However, one of the things that then happened was that the world faced the challenge of COVID, and one of the responses from government was that they wanted a whole of government and public sector response, and for regulators to think about what role they could play in supporting the UK response to COVID. So one of the ways in which that happened was that large amounts of public funding were made available through Innovate UK, the UK's innovation agency, to support specific applications of UAS to respond to the COVID-19 situation, and particularly that was supporting frontline operations by the NHS and the police. We in the regulator recognised that, and Innovate UK also recognised that there were certain attributes of our sandbox that really would support this. Particularly the initial triaging and understanding of the problem, helping to write an effective concept of operations that would allow, which would help innovators make an effective case to the regulatory teams that they should be allowed to be granted the particular approvals that they were seeking. And that really was important in relation to de-risking the applications that were being made, but also to improving the chances of their getting a regulatory approval, not guaranteeing it, but improving the chances that they would get that approval. And that was particularly important when we had such compressed timelines in relation to responding to COVID, and at a time when the CAA was under particular strain because of the very profound effects that the COVID situation was having on the rest of the aviation sector. So this was really important both for the CAA as an organisation, but also for industry, that we were able to pivot part of our sandbox capability to support that work. Received 21 initial applications and put them through a regulatory readiness assessment, which we review and return within a week to the subjects and also to UKRI as funders. We have secured agreement with our regulatory teams that we prioritise those cases, and that's been running for now about 3 months, and we've had some really significant tests and trials taking place, in particular working with one of our new sandbox partners, who Alex is going to talk about in a little bit, Skyports, who have linked up 2 hospitals in the west coast of Scotland, one at Oban and the other in Mull, providing an air bridge supplying PPE and other equipment between the 2 hospitals on a just-in-time basis. So it's quite transformative examples of and great use cases of how the US technologies can really benefit the UK. One of the key technologies that we've been looking at and in the sandbox and in the innovation hub has been UAS traffic management, and we really see this as a cornerstone of future aviation system, but that it's incredibly complex to understand what the role of the CAA and indeed UTM in the future UK air traffic management landscape is going to look like. So with that in mind, we've been conducting a number of initiatives. In particular, we published our unified approach to the introduction of UTM, which provided initial exploration of the concept of UTM, seeking to define it internationally, set out our initial position and that of other NEAs, and then provide a number of recommendations stemming from what we found, both about how we need to develop our regulatory frameworks, but also about how the technologies need to be developed in order to satisfy existing regulations in relation to ATM and how they can be dovetailed together. One of the really significant pieces of work we've kicked off internally is to look at what the economic regulatory models for UTM would be in the UK and the broader regulatory frameworks that are at play there. It's very often in our experience in a lot of these topics has been that we've spent a lot, both the regulator and industry in developing these technologies have focused very much on the engineering challenge involved, and that clearly is the fundamental stage is getting the technology right. But as you are fully aware, I'm sure, there's a complex economic model within which air traffic services sit in the UK and in Europe. And it's therefore appropriate that we have to think about what is the role of UTM in future, how are those services going to be made available to the public, and who is going to pay for those services? That's really, really essential. And so we've kicked off significant work in that area, and we hope to be able to share our thinking on that in the coming month. We're fully expecting that, and we already know because of from some of the early stages, that the UKRI funded Future Flight Challenge is going to be addressing UTM as a key component. And our expectation, therefore, is that we're going to be doing a lot of work using our sandbox, our regulatory lab capabilities on the topic of UTM in the coming months, and thinking about what the appropriate regulatory frameworks are at present and what they're going to be in future, and apply that in a UK context. Now, that is very likely to be kicking off, but that in the coming months. That is being very much driven by the demand from industry through that UK-funded Future Flight programme. So at that point, you've probably heard enough from me. I'm going to hand you over to Alex, who's going to take up the next couple of slides and talk you through some of the technologies we've been looking at.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Georgiades. I'm the Innovation Services Principal of the Innovation Hub, and I lead two of our programs on autonomous and highly automated systems, as well as beyond visual line of sight drone operations. Since about last year, we've started structuring our approach towards those theme areas that David mentioned earlier around future mobility, UTM, autonomous systems, and BVLOS drone operations. And we started creating what we call as innovation programs. Now, innovation programs give us a more holistic approach in addressing those big four areas and any kind of innovation that might come our way down the line as well, in the sense that we see what are the requirements for the industry, what are the challenges we're facing as regulators as well, publishing our learnings, publishing sandbox challenges to start testing those technologies, and then in the end, publishing new guidelines for the industry as well. One of the programs we currently have is around autonomous and highly automated systems. Now, there's a lot of work currently going on at the international and national levels as well around artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence. Obviously, AI is now becoming more and more part of our everyday lives. However, employing such a technology in safety critical systems, in aviation particularly, whether in airborne systems or ground-based systems, has a lot of challenges that a lot of working groups and task forces internationally are looking into as to how we can address them, whether it is to come up with qualification or verification processes, certification processes, or even standardization of these kinds of technologies in the aviation industry. Now, we as CAA are actively involved in this field. We are participating in those task forces. We are participating in those efforts in better understanding those technologies as well. However, as part of our Innovation Hub programs, we're taking a slightly different approach, and we're looking at addressing the bigger picture, let's say, of autonomous and automated systems as a whole, rather than just artificial intelligence. We do recognize that AI plays a very important role in most of these kinds of more autonomous systems, and we aim to utilize the work that is currently going on internationally when it comes to this program as well. This approach will obviously help the CAA address the challenges of such system, the safety critical aspects of such system, but rather than just focusing on AI, we address other challenges surrounding them, such as integration with the wider system of systems that is the aviation industry and the wider ecosystem as well. As with a lot of our other programs in the Innovation Hub, the industry plays a pivotal role in this work stream. We work with industry, work with other regulators, government entities, both in the UK level and international level as well, not only to develop our approach, but also to further understand these technologies as well internally and build the skills necessary for the future to be able to properly regulate and oversee these kinds of developments in the industry. Now, following our approach with every kind of program in the Innovation Hub, this is a structured approach. We're starting with an overview of the research that has been undertaken to date, obviously leading up to formalizing our position as CAA and formulating a regulatory approach or creating a framework based on which these kinds of technologies can be approved and even regulated in the future as well. Now, on the next slide, it's a very high-level view of what kind of approach we are proposing. This is very high level on purpose, so that we don't bore you with the nitty-gritty details of our programs. And these are the first steps towards regulating such technologies. This is specifically for the autonomous and highly automated systems. We start by doing some research, if we can call that, of work that is currently ongoing and work that has already been completed in this field. Engagement with stakeholders, as I've mentioned before, industry has a pivotal role in these kinds of programs. We do some scoping and we gather the stakeholder views and we publish what we call a scoping paper. The scoping paper and the purpose of it is to essentially outline the challenges we're seeing with these kinds of technologies, also present the different views that exist on these kind of topics. There's a lot of misunderstanding as to what is autonomous, what is automated. The lines are usually blurred between where does an automation start and stop, where does autonomy start and stop. And moving on from work package 1, as we call it, we continue our stakeholder engagement. We have some internal consultations with the CAA as well. We've got a lot of experts that focus on various areas that automation and autonomy touch upon. And we start defining our own definitions as CAA. So what do we mean when we say autonomous systems? What do we mean when we say automated systems? And we publish those views in our fundamentals paper. In that fundamentals paper, we also outline what we think is a possible path towards this system being adopted and regulated in the future. And finally, we move to work package 3 that we expect to be the lengthier and the more resource demanding of the 3 work packages. This is when we start splitting the autonomous and highly automated system into, let's call them sub work streams, where we start seeing into domain specific areas the challenges. So challenges around autonomous air traffic management or autonomously piloted aircraft and so on. Different areas will have different challenges, and we're going to be publishing sandbox challenges to address and look into those areas in more detail. And finally, as expected, we'll be publishing those learnings as we do with every kind of sandbox challenge we have. We expect this program to be kicking off sometime next year, and as with any kind of program, we'll be publishing our learnings as we go through it. Now, I'm going to go back in time and talk about our first sandbox challenge, which was published last August. Now, as David mentioned, when we first started the Innovation Hub, we onboarded 6 entities, which was more of a use case specific. So it was what the companies wanted to do. And through those companies, we've started learning a lot of things with regards to what kind of challenges there are there, but we also learned a lot, excuse me, when it comes to how do you run the sandbox more efficiently, how do we run this Innovation Hub more efficiently as well. So we started shaping our thinking and starting moving towards what we call our sandbox challenges, where we as Innovation Hub publish the challenge and we invite applicants to come and tell us this is how we intend on addressing those challenges. So we've launched our first one last August in Beyond Visual Line of Sight drone operations, which we're looking for UAS operator to come and tell us how they intend on addressing the challenges, especially surrounding detect and avoid systems. Now, in manned aviation, as you all know, you have the pilot on board who can, in visual flight conditions, can see and avoid other traffic, which in the case of unmanned systems, you no longer have that capability. So we need to find equivalent ways of achieving that, either through technological or operational means. And the big challenge is how do you do that in non-segregated airspace? When we launched that challenge back in August, we've received about 30 plus application. We've immediately onboarded one. We started with CAA last year. And since then, we've onboarded 3 further entities, Skyports, Boeing, and Flylogics as well. We're working to them to address this concept of detect and avoid system in order to operate beyond visual line of sight in non-segregated airspace. Each entity brings something different to the table. Each entity is proposing something different, a different way on addressing those challenges. And this is what we like to see. We don't want to address just one part of the challenge. We don't want to provide one possible solution. We want to see what are the capabilities that can be accomplished with any kind of technology, really. And this is a very important key, that we will not be approving any specific technological solution. We want to see what are the capabilities required to effectively detect and avoid other aircraft and other airspace users. Through this sandbox challenge, we publish all our learnings, because this is what we're aiming to do as part of the sandbox, is not to help one particular entity, is to help the entire industry. So through the lessons learned, through working with these companies, with these entities, we publish any kinds of lessons learned. We have about four main publications that we've already published over the past year, with a lot more to come. And we're now restructuring our whole program to make it more efficient and start targeting specific challenges. And there will be more announcements coming out soon in the next couple of months. As you can see, as David mentioned before, BVLOS operations of UAS is one of the key use cases that is targeted by the Future Flight Challenge as well, and will be addressed through our support that we are providing to that initiative. And that's all from me. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Angela Lynch, who will be talking more about future air mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, everyone. So you've heard a lot about our work, so I'm just going to finish off with a few words, giving you an overview of our programme, which we currently call Future Air Mobility. It really involves picking up on some of the individual themes that David and Alex have been talking about, but it's seeing them together as a means of understanding the challenges that may be coming up, and also with a view to shaping our understanding of the future regulatory landscape that may include a more diverse range of air mobility options. So under future air mobility, we're talking about newer or different ways of transporting people and some goods or cargo by air, be it new aircraft design, cleaner aircraft, different operations, or different types of business model. So this would include the common terms of urban air mobility and advanced air mobility. By capturing the breakdowns of such proposed operations, we can test the industry-led ideas against the flexibility of current regulations, and also identify gaps or issues that may need to be addressed under such proposals. So future air mobility is very much evolving, but some examples of the work that we're doing, I'll just provide. So as David mentioned earlier, our latest regulatory sandbox project will aim to answer some of the regulatory questions around types of operations, use of airspace and operational environment for future air mobility. An announcement will hopefully be made soon about the successful applicant that we've selected to progress for this first project, and the project will kick off into the new year and across the first half of 2021 as well. In the same way as has been mentioned, and under the typical sandbox approach, as well as gaining the lessons and findings that we can discuss internally across the CAA, we will be sharing output with industry so that we can look at some of the initial answers to solving some of the challenges around future air mobility. In addition, and again in line with some of the things that David discussed earlier, part of the Future Air Mobility Programme is there to clarify existing regulation. One example of this is we released the publication about testing novel technology in UK airspace. This was aimed at, again, new entrants, people less familiar with the aviation sector than some of you, but really outlining the fundamentals of airspace and showing how the first phase or development of new aircraft and operations, the development of a testing programme, can work within the existing regulatory framework for that. Similarly, one of the key points about future air mobility is that it requires a lot of collaboration, not the remit of one individual actor or stakeholder to progress. We released, in coordination with the project of social license, a guide for innovators, encouraging anyone developing new operations or new proposals to work together, to communicate clearly and transparently what their proposals are, to get the input from existing airspace users as well as the wider public, and that was under the social license to operate guidelines. Again, similarly to as Alex described, we see part of this programme as ensuring that the CAA and wider stakeholders are joined up when it comes to developing new ideas and new concepts. So we've been participating in the industry-led EUROCAE working group. It's looking at developing industry responses to EASA's SC VTOL regulation. And we will be providing more thinking and more information on future air mobility across next year. And as David says, in addition to our sandbox project, this also links in with a lot of the themes and the concepts and the questions being answered under the Future Flight Challenge programme. So I'll leave it there and hand back to Zoe.
Thanks. Just before, just before we hand over, just to say thank you very much to my colleagues Alex and Angela for presenting, and thank you to colleagues from GATCO and from BALPA for your time today. It's a pleasure for us to be able to present to you, and I'm sure you will have some tremendous insights to share and questions to ask us, so we'll look forward to getting them.
Thank you, David, Angela and Alex. That was both informative and a useful presentation, and I hope the audience got something out of it. We do have a few questions, if you don't mind. So I'll just kick off. The first one is from Tom Harrison and Tim Pottage, which I've put together as one. And it's how GATCO and BALPA could get more involved with the Innovation Hub, and do you see them as key stakeholders?
Absolutely. Undoubtedly, you're the voice of your communities, and we're very, very keen to engage with you. Please have a look. I've just changed the slide so it shows you where you can access more information on all of our work. But what I'd say is that one of the key things that we're doing is trying to make our policy-making processes as open as possible. And so one of the things that we do is publish what we call calls for insight. The biggest example of that is a piece of work that Angela led in relation to future air mobility, where we published a call for insight on risks and within the future air mobility model. And we encouraged people to come back and contribute their analysis, and we'd really welcome. That's a model that we're going to be using a lot in the future, so that will be a very direct and immediate way for your communities to engage directly with us and help shape our thinking. So yes, absolutely, you're very important to us, and there will be lots of routes to engage with us as we go through this policy making process. So please look out for them on our website. You can also add yourself to our mailing lists, which is accessible to our website, and again that will allow us to share with you updates on policy making opportunities.
Thanks, David. Now,
I was trying to talk. Sorry, I was on mute. If I can expand a bit on what David is mentioning there, and giving the program on autonomous system as an example, which I think that's when the question came in. So I'm wondering whether they were also mentioning about this program specifically. Now, obviously, when we develop any kind of program and we want to engage with the industry, any kind of stakeholders, it's not going to be just the people developing these kinds of technologies or operating these kind of technologies. It's about stakeholders that are affected in general by these kinds of innovations. And obviously, when we're talking about autonomous systems, whether airborne or ground-based, we're primarily talking about obviously pilots. We're obviously talking about air traffic controls and so on, which are key stakeholders to those technologies being allowed in the future and being enabled to become a reality down the line. So we do plan on engaging with them. We do see them as a key piece in the puzzle going forward in the future, and obviously they play a very important role. We do plan on engaging with them either through calls for insights or for expressions of interest, but we also plan on engaging with them directly as well.
Thank you, Alex. I'm just running through some more questions. I had a bit of a problem with my PC, but it's fine now. Okay, another question from Tom. These are in no particular order. Tom Harrison. When do the presenters believe that we will see the first UAV available to operate BVLOS inside segregated airspace?
So in relation to inside segregated airspace, we already have a number of programs that the CAA has supported. Alex might be able to give some more specific details, but with specific numbers. But there have been a number of BVLOS operations. A great example of that is the Skyport air bridge between Oban and Mull that I highlighted earlier on, and those are all taking place within temporary danger areas, which provide the segregation as a primary mitigation to uncooperative aircraft, etc. So that is the major route at present to undertaking BVLOS operations. I think the question that we're grappling with at the CAA and that the Innovation Hub is playing a very important role in is how can we use the testing and trialling of the technologies that's taking place within those temporary danger areas at present, and then scale beyond that, so that we start withdrawing that segregation as much as possible, and build a route towards unsegregated operations in uncontrolled airspace. I don't know if Alex would like to add anything on that.
No, I think you've covered everything perfectly. We do see a number of operations currently taking place beyond visual line of sight in segregated airspace, because the challenge, as I've mentioned before, still remains is about detecting those non-cooperative aircraft, and it's about building up our knowledge and approach towards that eventual non-segregated airspace operations. We see now entities coming forward with proposing to operate within TMZ, transponder mandated zones as well, where other aircraft must be transponder equipped so that they can be visible to the UAS operators. So in that case, we're now evaluating different approaches to deconfliction and so on. So different kinds of operations and different kind of airspaces require different kinds of mitigations as well. And obviously, we need to investigate all of them. We don't want to focus on just one specific path or one specific approach. So we do see different, let's say, flavors of these kinds of detect and avoid systems, essentially.
Thank you. Question from John Freeman. While you have said you do not regulate as such, can innovations, in your terms, include not just technology, but regulatory innovations, particularly with the UK leaving EASA?
Yes, absolutely. So that's I think where our non-regulatory rule really comes to the fore here, is that we're able to have discussions with industry about what opportunities they see in future in relation to the future architecture of regulation in response to these technologies. So that includes saying, where do you feel that there's opportunities for the uptake of innovation to be faster if we adopt more anticipatory and flexible approaches to innovation that are bespoke to the UK. And I think that is where, within that Brexit context, there's potential to see where value can be added from those new regulations. So absolutely, our mandate is not simply to to look at technology that is now, but also to look ahead and say what should our regulations be in future to anticipate those new technologies. I think hopefully that's come across from all of the work streams that we've been describing today. We're not just looking at in regulation as it is now, but trying to point a way to where we think regulation will be in 5 or 10 years.
Thank you. Another question from Tim Pottage. What is the panelist's best estimate for how quickly UAM will develop, and when and where do you feel the first commercial service will start?
This is a great question, and it will be interesting to see if Angela's answer and mine are the same. So I think the status at the moment, and again, Angela, please do correct me if I've characterised any of this incorrectly, but we're aware of a number of cases where the UAM vehicles, FAM vehicles, are proceeding through certification with the FAA and EASA, and they're well progressed down that path, and they're looking at within the next 2 or 3 years having an outcome to that certification process. One of the things we've been prompting in our discussion with industry is to say, though, this is not just an engineering problem or an engineering challenge. This is a challenge of integration into the wider aviation ecosystem. So that means tackling everything from air traffic management integration through to pilot training, through to maintenance organisation approvals, through to the building of new infrastructure, vertiports, charging points, and even thinking about what the new consumer protection framework that has to be put in place. Because we're talking about aviation operating radically different models, and to expect we would be able to use the existing protections and framework for consumers, which relate to hub and spoke, point-to-point aviation is not likely to be appropriate. So I think it would be fair to say that we're aware that the engineering component is well understood and is being progressed, but a lot of other aspects to this that aren't yet being tackled. The projection of having operational aircraft, certified aircraft for about 2023, 2024 is what we see at the moment, and that looks fairly realistic. But as yet, none of those other issues have been dealt with yet. I think my personal view, editorializes, that we will probably see fixed route operations shortly thereafter, but that this full sort of distributed model of aviation on demand that some people like Uber are advocating is many more years off, but that we will see the vehicles and the operations that will support that coming in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, I think is very likely. Angela, what's your reflection on that?
Yep, I would agree with everything you've said, David. I mean, for a scheduled, fixed route, piloted, certified aircraft, transporting people from A to B 2 to 3 years, to me feels doable and realistic from what we've seen. As David says, it's the other issues. So I think when the question says where will it be, it will be someplace where there is a strong business case, where there is a transportation need. And I think it's one of the interesting things that we're looking at under future air mobility, where aviation has quite possibly, and for very valid reasons, in some sense, been seen as a separate transportation method, or separate to the rest of the transportation networks. What we're now seeing is future air mobility as part of an integrated transport network possibility. So in terms of business cases where there's a need for actually getting people from A to B, be it because of road congestion or lack of ground infrastructure or other types of transportation, but there's, so that it's going to be where there's a strong business case, and where there's been consistent collaboration with the various stakeholders required as well, would be all I can say really from that.
Clearly it's a very complex task, and I really look forward to seeing how it develops over the next months and years. Question from Mike Thrower. Up to what height is it anticipated that UAS will operate, and will this require airspace change to integrate with manned aircraft?
So I'll give some thoughts on that before throwing it over to Alex. Yes, I think the existing models that we're seeing, particularly from EASA, is focused on the U-space model of sub 400 feet, looking at how we can leverage that airspace, which is presently uncongested. But I think as we see UAS RPAS move to the point of carrying heavier payload for longer distances, particularly moving to sort of commercial cargo carriage, it's likely they will have to go higher in order to achieve the utility that makes them economically viable. And that they will likely also have to be able to take advantage of dynamic navigation, so it won't be a case of having very fixed routes. That accords with the CAA's hope that we don't move into a place of further segregation within airspace, and that instead we look at how we can use technological advances in terms of equipage to allow that unsegregated fuller airspace and integrated access. That I think is where we're coming from, rather than what we would prefer to do is make new forms of aviation fit within the existing airspace construct, rather than re-engineer airspace to meet those. There will, of course, as we said, be a case for temporary and stepping stone airspace changes. I think the temporary gauge area is already in use. Transponder mandate zones are already being contemplated as a stepping stone towards to allow greater scale testing. But I think it's the ambition that the CAA has in relation to other types of aviation, particularly general aviation, for there to be less segregation and more integration, is shared in relation to UAS. Alex, is there anything you would add in relation to that?
Yeah, I would expand and say that height is just, let's say, part of the equation essentially, and it's more have to do with airspace classes as well. I mean, different airspace classes have different requirements for manned aviation, and even in the unmanned world, they will have to comply with those requirements regardless of the class they operate in. So whether it's 400 feet or 4,000 or 40,000 feet, there are certain class requirements that they need to adhere by. We see standards being developed. Standards have been developed, especially for larger platforms that intend on operating on higher altitudes. We see systems similar to what you'd see in a manned aviation, such as the TCAS system, being adopted for unmanned systems as well. So it's about having the same capabilities in an unmanned platform as you would in manned aviation. It's a bit trickier when we talk about uncontrolled and unsegregated airspace, especially the very low level altitudes as well, because that's where you might encounter non-cooperative aircraft, and that is the big challenge we're trying to address, as we've previously mentioned. People would think that operating controlled airspace might be more dangerous, but actually, at least you do have some visibility in controlled airspace. You do have some flight information services to some extent. So there's different challenges surrounding each class of airspace, and obviously, the altitude is only part of those classes.
Thank you, Alex. Matthew McKay has asked, in the latest version of CAP 722, it mentions that we should contact the CAA with regard to a light UAS certificate, an LUC. Where do you see this fitting into the regulatory landscape post the 31st of December? And also, it appears the intent is going to engage small UAS operations to join together, operating under a common set of processes, procedures under an established, certified LUC or UAS operator. Sorry, my computer. Who works broadly following the concept of an airline, i.e. the nationwide small operators are effectively a base operation. Is this correct, or do you envisage it working in a different way?
So I think, first of all, I just add caution that we are not the UAS regulatory team within the CAA, and therefore there's a limit to what we'll be able to say at this stage. But we are very aware that there's a lot of work going on, and there's a process of significant update going on to CAP 732 to take account of the new UAS regulations that have come out from the Commission, and there's a lot of work ongoing with that. I'm going to ask Alex to give a bit of insight on some of this, but I think perhaps what would be best is if the way I could possibly ask you to pass on that question in writing, and we'd be happy to come back to you with a proper response, because I want to make sure we give you an accurate response. But Alex, if there's anything you've got to add on that one.
No, it's essentially what you've mentioned, David. That question is mainly better as towards the UAS unit, and from our understanding, is essentially that the LUC is providing just the ability of some operators to authorize certain elements of their own operation. It's still quite limited in scope, and it's essentially seen as you've seen in CAP 72, it's called an augmented operational authorization, essentially, but it will require a lot of additional investment with regards to the safety management aspects of it. And that is why the UAS unit is advising any interested parties to get in touch with them directly so that they can discuss the proposals as well.
Thank you. Another one from Mike Thrower. Does the Innovation Hub deal with the proposed spaceports, or is this a separate thing?
So to give a hopefully not be a too complicated answer, so we are, the CAA provides an open front end for all queries and questions that might come in, and so we do provide that support in relation to questions about space regulation as well. However, there is an existing CAA space regulatory team which already is responsible for certain parts of overseeing launch and particularly aerodrome operation. I'm sure your members will be aware there's a consultation which is just, I think, recently closed in relation to the statutory instruments for the Space Industry Act, which has just gone out. And I think that it's fair to say that envisages that certain functions that are currently being delivered by the UK Space Agency could be delivered by the CAA, but that's subject, I believe, to deliberation by Parliament, and therefore it's not yet absolutely certain that would happen. But it's fair to say that the CAA is preparing should Parliament decide to give us that mandate to deliver all aspects of space regulation. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we're very happy to deal with that. If there's any questions, please do come through our web portal. There is, though, a specific team that is dealing with those aspects, and it is potentially going to be more involved in that in future.
Thank you, David. A question from Jeremy Pigton. Is there a danger that the technology and the political drive to introduce it is outstripping the ability of the ATM system to accommodate it?
So again, I'll maybe make some comments up front and then go over to Alex. We are acutely aware and work very closely with our colleagues in ATM regulation to understand what the impact of these new technologies is going to be for the sector, and how we can begin to quantify the safety impact. Absolutely take the point that there's significant potential that as industry looks to scale, and the ambition that we are seeing from other parts of industry would in the future have the potential to present increased safety risks in terms of the pure volume of aviation that would take place. I think that's where we recognise there's going to have to be an increased level of automation to help support the air traffic management infrastructure that is in place now. So yes, I think we are very cognizant of that risk, but that's where we think that's one of the reasons why we're putting so much emphasis on automation to help manage that workload as it comes through in the future. Alex?
Yeah, you pretty much covered it perfectly there. I mean, the simple answer to that question is that yes, there is absolutely the risk that it might outstrip the ability of the current ATM system essentially to accommodate it, and that is one of the things that we're concerned with. And as I've mentioned before, a key part of what we're doing is the engagement of the industry, the really important stakeholders in the industry. It's not just the ones that want to use that technology, it's the ones that these kinds of technologies will affect as well, whether it's drones, whether it's electronic conspicuity, whether it's new type of traffic management systems. All of these have impact in the existing infrastructure, and we need to understand the full extent of that impact and how can we mitigate against these kinds of potential dangers down the line.
Thank you. Question from Lewis Barbarian. Amazon Prime Air seems to be quite late to come to the party from their initial ambitions, and they've apparently laid off dozens of employees according to the news. Do you think that's an indication that while innovation is important, and it is good to see that the CAA is encouraging that, a strong regulatory and standardisation framework is required so that the regulators do not fall behind technology and hinder development?
Thanks for the question, but I didn't catch who the organisation was at the beginning.
Amazon Prime.
Okay, yeah, understood. Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely, yes. I think I wouldn't want to comment on a specific company, that wouldn't be fair. But I think what we absolutely agree that there's a risk that if a regulator is not looking to adopt an anticipatory approach to new technology, that we could be left behind. That really was the strategic impulse behind the decision by the CAA board to establish our function. And that is really what drives everything that we do, and that's why we have a particular emphasis on horizon scanning and trying to keep abreast of developments in new technology that come through. I think there's one of the important things is that the industry is constantly iterating on its approach to advancing technology and solving technological problems. So they will constantly adapt and change their approach, and that is challenging to a regulator. We have to be able to keep abreast of that, but we do that through having constant discussions with our stakeholders, constantly trying to understand what's motivating them, what's the technological challenges they're tackling, and how they think the changes that they're driving are going to impact the sector. And if we didn't do that, you're absolutely correct, we would be rapidly left behind. And that has innovation very much benefits from being forward-facing. Innovation has always been a part of the sector. It's inherent from the very first days of flight that we have experimental and forward-facing regulation. So it is critical that the regulators is equipped to keep up with that, because you guys are always going to be innovating, and we've got to be able to come on that journey too.
Thanks, David. Just before I continue with the questions, we will have to finish at 11:30. So if you have any more questions before I continue with the ones I've already got, please post them in the chat function on your screen. Question from Chris Gibson. Are there any future roles anticipated for current airline pilots with AI, when AI becomes more commonplace in commercial aviation and aircraft move more to pilotless operations?
So I think, again, I'll say some comments and then pass it over to Alex, and then also to Angela, because I think there's some interesting aspects to UAM and future mobility on this too. I think we've seen a constant progression within the development of the role of the pilot. We've seen a situation where we used to have a number of staff in the cockpit, pilots and engineers. We've reduced that number gradually over time. We're seeing increasing amounts of with activities on the part of Airbus, for example, in relation to automated takeoff and landing. There's increasing amounts of automation in the cockpit. We're seeing new types of cockpit being developed. The work that the ATI is doing in relation to glass cockpits all suggest that being in command of the aircraft and giving them all the tools, as many of the tools as possible to facilitate that role. How that will continue to change, I think, is clearly up for discussion, and is very much going to depend also on the operational context of a particular type of aircraft. So it's not necessarily that a wide body commercial aircraft is necessarily going to continue to behave or have the same requirements as smaller urban vehicles or UAS aircraft. I think what we're perhaps going to see is more heterogeneity in how they're managed, but with very clear requirements for training and operational oversight. So, Alex, do you want to come in, and then we'll ask Angela for some views as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've covered it quite well. Is that, and personally, the move to fully pilotless aircraft, at least for large passenger aircraft, I think that's quite some time away, to be fair, and that is not really the intention of most of the industry proposals that we're currently seeing, because we're not going straight from a two-person cockpit, let's say, to fully pilotless from one day to the other. There needs to be a gradual transition. Let's say we're starting with keeping both pilots in the cockpit. It's just, as David mentioned, automating some of those functions that the human operator would otherwise perform. It's about understanding what functions are they expected from those pilots, could be on the ground as well from air traffic controllers, and then starting to automate some of the more simple tasks, or even provide some sort of an advisory function in the cockpit. So the AI provides some advice to the pilots rather than taking action themselves, until we start gradually building trust in those systems. And this is a very key component. If AI is ever going to become part of the future cockpit in large passenger aircraft, is building trust in these systems and better understanding these systems, how they behave. We start by some sort of a secondary role, an advisory role, or automating some simple tasks, and then we can gradually see down the line, maybe replacing one of the pilots in the cockpit, but it's not going to be from one to the other. It's not going to replace both pilots in the cockpit straight away. There needs to be a gradual approach to anything. Similar with air traffic management as well, and air traffic controllers as well. It's one of the questions, you can understand, that we get asked a lot. We don't see it happening soon. It might be the vision down the line for the distant future, but currently we're still trying to tackle the basic questions as to how can we build trust in these systems for even the simplest tasks on board the aircraft. Angela?
Thanks. Yeah, just building on Alex's comments, there's a piece of work that was done that some of you might be aware of, led by Eurocontrol, but with lots of different stakeholders. And it's specifically looking at the technological and societal technological challenges from the perspective of human factors. And I think there's some really interesting work being led under human factors that also, as Alexa says, even when we're looking at far out situations of UAM or AI automation, there are a lot of different configurations and a lot of different possibilities, but also a lot of roles within that for the skilled humans or the pilots, as it is. So I think that's absolutely open. And just in terms of sort of future air mobility, because we're talking about the early phases so far before commercial operations, we're talking about R&D of aircraft. But I am aware of the role that test pilots, for example, are playing. So a lot of the OEMs, not only are they dependent on the test pilots for the very first flights, but also bringing in pilot experience and knowledge when it comes to developing flight systems, controls, understanding the performance of new aircraft as well. All of these pre-certification, pre-approval research and developments, which I think need to be done with the people who have the skills and the experiences. So yeah, lots of different roles. And I think this is also part of our future air mobility approach of it's not about putting new technologies into silos on their own, but it's about looking at the existing aviation sector, looking at new proposals and moving forward all together as opposed to one and the other.
And I think it would be fair to say, Angela, that our experience to date has not been that OEMs in the future mobility space view that their first generation and likely second generation of aircraft are going to in any way be fully autonomous and have no pilot involved. They're looking to build public trust and public confidence, exactly as Alex said, and the pilot in command is a key component of that. And I think they're building business models that focus on having pilots very much at the centre of their operations in the short and medium term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from one of the other questions I might have glanced there as well, somebody makes the point that this is also a societal and a perception question as well. And I think there's a lot of people out there that would prefer to have a pilot taking them from A to B rather than a machine. And from the safety perspective, until we have the assurance or proof, that won't happen anyways. But there is also what is a service and what do people want, and that comes down to piloted operations as well.
I think many of you will agree that it's very important to have skin in the game in this industry. Question from Stuart Clark. At the Royal Aeronautical Society conference, Frederic Logier, sorry if I haven't pronounced his name correctly, the CAA's Innovation Services Lead, said GPS within cities is not always accurate. From a safety and security point of view, bearing in mind your comment about the inaccuracy of GPS in cities, can you reassure us that small UAM vehicles will be safe to operate in close proximity to high buildings in heavily built-up urban environments, especially in bad weather, high winds, icy conditions, fog, snow, etc.?
So thanks. I think this one I'll again probably ask Alex to pitch in and help me out a bit. Yeah, absolutely. I think we recognise there are some significant technological limitations at present on the UAS as they are operating in a radically different environment from one that anyone's ever operated in before. Your finger on some really key issues: proximity to high buildings, weather, what's the impact of micro weather, what's the impact of vortices between buildings and very built up areas, what's the effect of GPS, what's the effect of the availability of 4 or 5G connectivity. Absolutely, these are all things that are at the very forefront of our regulatory team's concerns. And we would absolutely expect that the CAA is not going to grant any regulatory approval before we are convinced through the development of an appropriate operational safety case that an operation will be allowed to go ahead in that context without having appropriate safety mitigations. And those are absolutely some of the very many issues that are brought up in that process. Alex, I don't know if you've any thoughts on the specific issue of GPS, but as I say, I think it is one of many technological issues that have to be demonstrated.
Yeah, absolutely. No comment specifically on the GPS. It's obviously an issue. We've seen it in drones, we've seen it in UAM as well. I'm just going to stand on what you've mentioned. Part of the question was if we can reassure the industry that UAM will be safe to operate in close proximity. But what we can't reassure is that if they're not safe, they're not going to be operating. And it's as simple as that, really. Yes, we are the Innovation Hub. We're here to help the industry advance, but we are the CAA, and our priority is safety above everything else. We're not going to endanger anyone just for the sake of innovation. We're here to enable these technologies to happen and fail in a safe way and in a safe environment, that's what we're trying to do. So if we have questions about the safety of something, if there is a high possibility of a danger or an accident occurring, then there simply won't be flying in those conditions and in those environments.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, a question about security and counter-terrorism from Stuart Clark again. Is there a control room from which a remotely piloted drone or UAM operation being run from? And what physical security measures do you believe need to be implemented to prevent bad actors from trying to break in and take control of vehicles for illegal purposes?
So I think I wouldn't like to comment too specifically on any examples where people do have operational control rooms, etc. A component very in relation to UAS operations, which I think is what you highlight the case of, there is physical security in relation to the pilot, the remote pilot in command of the aircraft is accounted for and required within to be dealt with under the approval for the OSC. And again, as Alex said in relation to his last answer, if there is not sufficient mitigation and control in place for that, then the operation just won't be happening.
Thank you. I'm aware we're kind of running out of time, so probably a couple more questions, and then I'll ask any questions that haven't been answered. Please send them to the presenters privately, and they'll be happy to answer them, I'm sure. Question from Tim Pottage. Where will work on the requirements for the next gen pilot training for next generation aircraft be centred? Will it be manufacturer, training organisation, or regulator led?
So this is one where I'll probably ask Angela to come in. This is an area. This is a really interesting area. I think it will be a partnership between all three of those groups that you've referred to. But what is interesting and slightly different, particularly in the future mobility space, is that a lot of companies are coming, a lot of OEMs are coming to us and saying they also want to become pilot training organizations, and that they're really adopting a sort of vertically integrated model to how they're developing their aircraft, how the aircraft will operate, and who will operate the aircraft on their behalf. So that is an interesting and quite different dynamic from what we've had in the past. So I think it's absolutely all three stakeholders, pilot training organizations, the regulator, and developers and manufacturers of the aircraft themselves it will be a partnership between all three, but we may see some new roles coming in for some of those players. Angela, is there anything you want to add on that one?
No, again, I'd agree with everything that David said, and yeah, just given the sort of first phase, early R&D sort of is to a great extent being led by the manufacturers. That's who we're seeing sort of coming up with some of the ideas and early concepts on the training side as well. But as David says, it's something we're acutely aware of, and also what current training organisations are looking to as well. So I think the ideal answer is all three involved as well.
Thank you, Angela. One last question, if I may, from Lewis again. How do we get around the legal issues of commander's authority and responsibility where fully autonomous passenger aircraft are concerned? If something goes wrong and there's an accident, is the operator and/or the equipment manufacturer liable?
So I think that's a really interesting question. It's one that a lot of NAAs are grappling with at present. We have seen some changes in some laws to sort of anticipate for that. There's also a lot of thinking that can be drawn, we think, from the world of ground-based automated vehicles, where there has already been some work in relation to the concept of legal liability and responsibility for manufacturers and the continuing responsibilities of manufacturers in relation to to over wireless updates, in terms of software updates that are happening in relation to aircraft vehicles when they're throughout their life. I think it's far too early to say what the, and certainly it's not something we're looking to get around. It's absolutely that the liability has to sit properly with the correct person in relation to who has responsibility for the operation and control of the aircraft, and that's something that will not change. It may change exactly where that sits, but the specific those liabilities will not disappear, and so I think it's probably in relation to the technology itself too early to say where it would be appropriate for those to rest. But there's going to be a lot of lessons that we can learn from other NAAs and from other parts of the economy that will help inform that debate and that discussion. And again, that's something that we would be fully expecting that BALPA and GATCO and other stakeholders will play a full role in discussing, and I think we'll be talking about for many years to come.
Yes, I agree, and I think it's very important to learn the lessons from the past and keep reminding ourselves of that. And thank you, all of you from the CAA's Innovation Hub. It's been a very informative and useful presentation, I know for BALPA and GATCO specifically, and our members. And I hope everybody joining has enjoyed it as much as I have. If you haven't had your questions answered, I encourage you to send them directly to the presenters. And we thank you very much for joining and look forward to seeing you next Monday for our final instalment of our symposium. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.